At the heart of the current Formula One technical regulations relating to the power unit is one of these, in fact two of these. It's a fuel flow meter. Now you've probably heard a little bit about it when the regulations were introduced in 2014. Formula One introduced a fuel flow limit of 100 kilograms per hour. Now what confused everybody is they also introduced at the same time a fuel consumption limit of 100 kilograms for the entire race. That's raised slightly since then, but it's confused people as to the difference between fuel flow and fuel consumption. Well, fuel consumption is how much coffee you can fit into your mug. Fuel flow is how quickly you drink that coffee. If you sip it, like I do, very slowly because it's hot, that's a low flow rate. If you downed it all in one go, you can bear the heat quite well, but also that's a very high fuel flow rate. So that's what's limited, and Formula One has limited very strictly to this 100 kilograms per hour. Now, what that does is place a real pressure on the teams to get the most out of the fuel that's allowed into that combustion chamber, because every bit of fuel that comes into that combustion chamber has to first pass through this flow meter, comes in one side and out of the other, and an ultrasonic technology in the middle measures exactly how much fuel's going in. But if you could get extra fuel into the combustion chamber that hasn't passed through this flow meter, then you'd get extra performance. Now, a number of teams have quibbled other teams on how they're doing it. There was a suggestion that somebody was using a scrambling system to mess with the ultrasonic process in the flow meter. That sounded to me a little bit far-fetched. These are really advanced bits of kit, cost about £20,000, and this is a real one, so I'm being quite careful with it. But also, people were clearly using lubricating oil. So the FIA has really tightly limited the amount of lubricating oil they're allowed for the engine. The oil tank sizes have got smaller, and actually the composition of the oil has changed. But if you pumped a little bit of that oil into the combustion chamber, you'd get a little bit of extra performance. That oil, of course, has a calorific value. And then there was another situation where it seemed that under the previous rules, Formula One cars were allowed to store up to 2 litres of fuel between this fuel flow meter and the combustion chamber. For 2020, that was really strictly reduced to 250 millilitres only. In addition to that, the FIA also mandated that every single team not only had to have one of these mounted in the fuel tank, they also had to fit a second fuel flow meter beyond the fuel tank, one controlled by the FIA, one controlled by the teams. If they don't record the same thing, that team is going to be called up to the stewards, and I suspect they'll be disqualified. So what does all of this have to do with Ferrari's current woes? Well, late in the season there was speculation that Ferrari had somehow found a way to bypass the fuel flow meter. And in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc was found to be running not quite the fuel load he'd declared, and they got a fine for that. The only reason you probably do that was either a mistake in the garage, which seems unlikely for a professional racing team, or perhaps you'd found a way to get extra fuel past the flow meter and into the combustion chamber for a couple of laps extra boost in the race. That's what the suspicion was, but there was no actual proof Ferrari did do that. Other suspicions have been thrown around because we all know there's an undisclosed settlement between the FIA and Ferrari, and we here don't know the details of that. It's probably down to something that's going on to try and bypass the fuel flow meter, because if you can get past the fuel flow meter, you get extra performance, but you are breaking the regulations of Formula One. Mattia Binotto has admitted that the regulation changes between 2019 and 2020 have cost Ferrari performance from the power unit. Particularly, he mentioned the oil tank changes. He did say it would have affected other teams, but the other power unit manufacturers have all denied this. So it's really on Ferrari, and they are the only power unit manufacturer to lose a huge amount of performance. But could that be down to the FIA settlement? We just don't know. Now, Ferrari's problems are not just related to the power unit. They've also got aerodynamic and chassis balance problems. The car doesn't handle too well, and we've seen Sebastian Vettel complaining quite a lot about that. Less so Charles Leclerc, which is interesting. But they bought an update package early in the season to one of the Austrian races, and that update package didn't really do what was expected of it. The team tried it out, took it off the car, put it back on the car, and then Charles Leclerc had a moment and broke some of the parts. Well, those parts are back at Silverstone, and it's interesting to see Ferrari chopping and changing between the two different designs at the moment. They're still not quite sure what they need from the car. Here you can see them stacked up outside the garages ahead of free practice, new and old. And Ferrari have still got this correlation problem, and that's why you're not seeing many updates come to the car. The team is still trying to understand exactly how the car's working. And in free practice 1 at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, you saw these what looked like headlights shooting out the back of the car. Now, I was quite surprised. I've never actually seen an F1 car fitted with sensors quite like this before, and there is some debate going on as to what they're for. If they were a yaw sensor, for example, they'd be pointing downwards, but these bright lights could be looking at the deformation of the base of the tyre, and it could be a high-speed camera in that sense, so you could really model what the tyre is doing at the bottom. The other theory is there was some flow vis applied to the rear of the car's floor, and those cameras just put the light in so they could see what the flow was doing. I think it was to do more with the deformation and movement of flow around the rear of the car, and it's just the latest step in what Ferrari are trying to do to understand the F1000 and how to make it work. But Ferrari are still a long way from having a competitive car. The power unit, it's not very good, and for the reasons we've discussed. The chassis imbalance, they can probably solve that when they solve the aerodynamic problems, but they don't yet understand the aero problems at all. Today, things went from bad to worse for Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. Vettel had been off the pace all day, and then late in free practice 2, he absolutely savaged this curb at Silverstone. There's some speculation that the curb was damaged, and the officials have been out there and had a good look at it, and I think made a few repairs. There are some new curbs here at Silverstone. But the result was something in the rear of the car, either the power unit, and I hope it's not the V6 engine block, or the transmission casing has been shattered, and it's leaking its lifeblood out all over the track. That looks to me like lubricating oil, and Sebastian Vettel's nose will be giving a clear indication. But Ferrari, it's not good news, and once again they are struggling. I do hope things improve for them later in the year.